Welcome back to Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famulner, and today we've been talking with Keija Parssinen, the author of The Ruins of Us, which is the Columbia One Read book this year. Many Mid-Missourians will spend some time this month discussing the book at events throughout the area. For the second half of our discussion today, we're joined by two more local authors to talk about what it's like writing in Mid-Missouri. Alex George is an Oxford-educated author and a lawyer who lives in Columbia. He wrote 4 novels published in the UK and Europe, and his American debut, called A Good American, was published last year. Alex, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Marlene Lee is the author of The Absent Woman, which was published earlier this year. She lives in Columbia and takes part in the Quarry Heights Writers' Workshop with Keija, which we'll undoubtedly be talking a little about today. Marlene, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right. And we'd also love to hear from you and our audience. Do you think of Columbia as a literary community? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia or join our online chat. And that kind of seems like a good question to start us off with, too, I guess. Is Columbia a literary community? It seems like you all might know best. Alex?
I mean, I think it is. I think it's extraordinary the number of people, the number of writers who are in this small town. It seems that you can't turn a corner without finding another one somewhere, and someone's just published another book or a book. I mean, it's amazing. And I was wondering why that might be, and I'm not entirely sure. I think it made it. Obviously, the university would be the obvious thing, but when you think about, and I don't know about you, Marlene, but I mean, as far as I certainly didn't come here because of the university. I don't think you did either.
No.
So if that is the case, there are some other fortuitous things that have happened as well. That and we've all just landed here, and it's fabulous.
Right. Marlene or Kay, you have any thoughts on that? Just what might make Columbia a haven for an author?
I think it's partly the university, as Alex says, because you have a lot of readers here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people who love to read, and they will attend readings. They have reading series here. The Quarry Heights Writing Workshop was kind of a center for me. I'm going to go back again to the Writers' Workshop this fall. There's a couple of spots still empty because it generates a lot of creativity and a lot of knowledge about the craft of writing. That got me started.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Orr Street Studio readings. There's the Boone County Historical Society readings, where I first heard Alex read,
Those
and
are
where
fabulous, those
I'll hear
Saturday morning
you.
book talks.
Yeah,
You
were
always
supposed
have
to.
about 60 people, I think, who
I
attend
know.
those.
Oh, wow.
You were
It's
supposed
incredible.
to read this month, but you were otherwise occupied. I think.
That's right.
It's a busy
that's
month
right.
for you. Yeah.
But it's a rich place. The bookstores are willing to have you read, and that's what a writer needs to be
And
heard.
to carry your book as well. Yellow Dog Bookshop and Columbia Books.
That's right.
Both make sure to carry signed copies by local authors. I just bought a memoir by Nina Furstenau, and was very excited to do that at Yellow Dog yesterday. And so it's just exciting to walk in and know, well, that's one of my friend's books, and heck, I'm going to buy it and get her to sign it. So I also think one of the things that makes Columbia a good place for writers is it's inexpensive to live here. Mm-hmm. So particularly if you're just starting out on your path, you might not be rolling in dough, and so it's really nice to pay not very much in rent and to have enough to do, but not so much that you're distracted constantly. I'm actually always, I listen to my friends who live in New York in wonderment, and kind of am fascinated by how they ever get any work done with how much goes on there. And Marlene, you've written in New York.
I lived in New
there.
York until a year ago May. I lived there for 11 years. I moved there from San Francisco because I sort of wanted to. I thought, well, I'll absorb some New York literary life. That's why I haven't been published. I'm not New York enough. It didn't happen in New York. You know where it happened? Columbia, Missouri.
Well, what is, you guys have all written and lived other places as well, around the country, around the world. What is different in those places than the situation here, I guess, in the life of an author, I guess, and like Kay was mentioning, the workflow, I guess, and just making it happen.
Well, I think Kay is right. The being in a small town does mean that there are fewer distractions, which means that you can just knuckle down and sit down and do your book. And again, I agree with her about the cost of living. That can certainly be helpful. I think also, there are an awful lot of good coffee shops. There are lots of highly caffeinated people with their laptops who are all typing away, and that probably helps as well. But yes, I lived in London for 13 years before I came here, and I did write several books while I was there, but it's certainly the pace of life is a little slower here. And, when you write, you need to take the time to think about things deeply and slowly, and so that's helpful for sure.
Right. Well, and how do you get a publisher who's not here to pay attention to you? How does that work, I guess, or doesn't work?
Some
It
of
does,
is-
apparently. We got everybody here.
Some of it is luck.
Yeah.
I went to the Missouri Writers Guild Columbia chapter, sat down next to Susan Finlay, a mystery writer, and she told me about her editor in England, because my publisher's English. And I wrote him, and he was more open than literary agents in New York. He was very open. We clicked. He liked my work. Another thing about New York is every other person in New York is a writer. But here it's kind of special still. And so I feel an identity as a writer here. In New York, I just felt like, that's another
A dime a
unpublished
dozen.
writer. Yeah, dime a dozen.
You're in a coffee shop and everybody's tapping away on their computers, and you're like, there's a sense of, well, I better write faster, or else he's going to get published
Your
before
novel's
me.
better than mine.
Well, that's an interesting point, though, because certainly in all of the people who I've met being in Columbia, the sense of community that there is between writers is wonderful. There isn't a shred, as far as I'm aware, of competitiveness anywhere. Everybody's extremely supportive, and the workshop that Keija started is probably the best example of that. And everyone is willing to, whether it's cajoling or encouraging, or what they will do what people need to do. And if people require help, if people have asked me to read manuscripts, and I'm always happy to do that. And there's a wonderful sense of, because writing is a lonely job more than anything else, and having any kind of community, and lots and lots of writers are on Twitter and Facebook and all of those wonderful social media things. There's nothing quite like being able to sit down over a cup of coffee, and whether you're moaning about your agent, or you're moaning because you've got writer's block, or you can't resolve this particular plot point, it doesn't matter. Having somebody who's right there, and there are enough people who actually understand that process, because people who don't write maybe voracious readers, but there comes a point where the barriers come down, and I don't really know what you're talking about unless you've been there and gone through it and slogged through it. And having all of these people to talk to and moan at can be, it's a good thing.
Well, and maybe that is a good time to talk about the Quarry Heights workshop. But Keija, maybe tell us a little bit about what that is, I guess, first. I'm sure many of our listeners aren't familiar with it.
Sure. It's the Koree Heights Writers Workshop, and I started it about 3 years ago. I'd been in Columbia about a year, and I was struck by this fact that every other person I seemed to meet was engaged in some creative undertaking, and many of them were writers. And I joined an informal writers group of women here, and was just eager to get back to this kind of workshop setting. I also really enjoyed teaching. I taught at Iowa for a year and loved that undertaking, and felt like I learned a lot about how to write from teaching. And so I started the workshop, and we had our first class in winter of 2011, and 8 people around my kitchen table, and we now meet up at Columbia Independent School, so we have a bit more space. It was a little cramped in my tiny house, which is in Quarry Heights, hence the name. And it was just a great way for me to meet other writers here and to sort of foster community. And at the end of every workshop, we have a community-wide reading that's open to anybody and everyone. And everybody who took the class gets to read for about 5 minutes from their work. And it's sort of BYOB. People bring wine and food, and we just hang out and enjoy each other's company. And so I think that's probably my favorite part about it, is that sense at the end of that festiveness of those readings.
And those readings are wonderful. I mean, I went to one, I don't know which one it was, but at PS Gallery. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine who I'd known for a long time stood up halfway through and began to read a children's story that she had written. I had no idea that she...
Was that Holly?
There was Holly.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that she was even a writer. And so, you talk about writers everywhere. It's exactly right.
And then you had the open mic, which you got together at the Berlin Cafe, and there were many, many people there. I don't know. There must have been 100 people.
Well, wow.
It was incredible.
Maybe 100. I would say at least 50. There was a nice crowd there, and Eli Gay over at Cafe Berlin opened up his space for us in the evening, and we just invited, again, it was open to the whole community, and had people sign up when they got there with a little bio, and then it was emceed by Shane Epping, who's a photographer here at Mizzou for the university, and he did a fantastic job. And I was just amazed by the quality of the work and the bravery of the people who were willing to get up there and share it. And also it was nice for me as a professional writer to see once again these writers who are doing this while they're doing their day job, while they're working and raising children and all of this, and managing to carve out some time to write a poem or write a short story. And it just reminded me that to get back to that passion and that drive, that's where it all starts.
Okay. We actually have a caller on the line I'd like to bring on, Cathy Salter from Columbia. Kathy, are you there?
Well, yes, I wanted to say hello to three people who have been wonderful participants in the Boone County Museum's Saturday morning book talks that began about a year ago and are now bringing in 60 to 90 people. Alex, I think, in December, and Marlene earlier this year when her book came out. And Keija was actually supposed to do a presentation this month, but of course she's doing about 100 other presentations this month. But this is an example of how we began not really knowing who the community of writers were, and the community of writers is so supportive here in Columbia that they have come month after month to hear each other and celebrate each other's publications of books, like Nina Furstenau, who you mentioned, who now has a second book coming out. So it's a richness in the same way that we have this wonderful art community, and now we're having an overlapping of art and writing, as in the Columbia Art League interpretations exhibit earlier this month.
And Kathy, I asked all the panelists here, I wonder your thoughts on why does this happen in Columbia? Why in mid-Missouri is this possible that we would have? Alex has been saying this is somewhat unique to a town this size.
It's because the Salters are here.
They came from New York, from England, from Keija, from Saudi Arabia and Texas. I grew up moving all over the place and came here in 1988 with my husband. And writing hadn't happened in my life until I came here. It's almost as though you're collecting from your life, and then you come here, and this place gives us the room to breathe, to sit down and let the writing come out. You don't have to be from this place, but there is something quite magical about this mid-Missouri world that has touched something in each of us that says, write. It's time to write. So it's why I know I need to live here, and it seems to be working for the three people you have in the room with you in the same way.
Well, Kathy, thank you very much for your call. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, have a good day. I guess we haven't heard from you, Marlene, on what you get out of Koree Heights, because you take part in that as well, and being a part of that community.
Yes. Keija and Lynn Shorey, who helps her teach, do very fine line edits, for one thing, to help, a bad sentence. You look at a sentence and you read it so many times you don't realize, there's something wrong with this. And they'll tell you. And also, they have the ability to look at the big picture and say, I think on one of my manuscripts, Keija, you wrote, I'm on page 60 and I don't know what this book is about. So I put that in brackets.
It was much nicer than it sounded in my letter.
It was out of love, right?
No, you needed to be tough. You needed to be tough with me because, a writer doesn't really want to hear that criticism. So I put the comments in brackets in the manuscript. Then when I'm going back through it, I see these brackets and I go, And later, I think she was right. Mm-hmm. I'm on page 60, and I didn't know where the book was going.
And you often can't know that until you reach the end of a draft anyway.
Right.
So you just sort of fumble through, and then you can go back and tighten it up and shore it up. And And it helps, I think, just from my experience at Iowa, and then I did take workshops in Brooklyn, to have this community of people who, it's more than an informal writing group where people aren't really required to respond to your work or read it really thoughtfully. And I really do request that everybody write a 1 to 2 page critique letter of the two people who put up work that week of their work, and really thoughtful, and obviously tone is very important in these letters. They're not intended to bash or make anybody feel bad. They're just meant to give constructive criticism and also praise what's going well with the manuscript too. And so I miss that community, and I would like to. Maybe I'll take Lynn's class this fall. Lynn
There's
Shorey
a
is
spot
teaching.
open.
Right. It's very valuable, I think, to have fresh eyes on your work.
And it's good to have a deadline, too.
Right.
Oh, I'm going to be read next week. I'd better get busy and give some fresh pages.
Alex, how do you make it work? What's your motivation on getting through these processes we're talking about?
Terror. Of various things. I have a deadline for my next book, which I need to deliver in February, and that keeps me motivated. And I get up at 5 o'clock every day and start tapping madly. I've never, with one exception, I was in a workshop in London for a little while, oddly with mostly expat Americans, funny, who are living.
And now the tables have turned. Yeah.
Yes, living in London. And I haven't really done, I certainly haven't done it here. And I enjoyed the experience. It was a worthwhile experience when I was over there. I'm not quite sure why I haven't done it here. Every writer has readers who are their sort of resources. And I have 2 agents, and I have an editor, and all of these people. But they need to be treated very carefully, because you can only read something for the first time once. And so I was actually having a conversation with my editor at Penguin a few months ago, and she was saying, well, I can read it if you like. And I was saying, well, no, I really want to wait until I've got to the end before I deliver it, because you only
It's a
get that
professional relationship,
one.
right?
It is.
It's not just a friendly, let me take a look. They've paid you money, and they want to see that you can deliver a product.
Right. So my agents read it, and they sort of reported back to the editor and said, I think it's okay. But it's and that relationship between an editor and a writer is an extraordinarily delicate but infinitely rewarding one when it works well. And I remember when I first signed my contract for A Good American with Penguin, my editor, who's called Amy Einhorn, and I talked for 3 hours on the telephone one afternoon, and we were just trying to work out whether we could work with each other. She needed to know that I was going to be able to take editorial comment, and I needed to know that she wasn't going to say, well, could we maybe add some vampires in here? or I guess these days it would be, could we maybe have some handcuffs in here? So just to make sure that we were sort of on the same page, if you'll pardon the pun. And we were. And so we had this 3-hour conversation. I then got a 9-page single-space letter from her saying, these are all the things you need to change. So I then went off into a hole for 6 months and did all of that work. But that sort of input and the book is a much, much better book as a result of it. And it can be a bit of a lottery how good your editor is. Mine is wonderful. And I feel extraordinarily lucky to have her. But so there's that level, and then there is also just a more casual sort of reader, and people who just read it. For my last book, at least, read along the way, and so say, and just be encouraging, because there are times, I said earlier on that it's a very lonely job writing books, and there are times you just need to reach out and say, would you mind looking at this, please, and tell me it's not terrible? Because you do. Every writer is assailed by self-doubt all the time, and just occasionally we all need a little prod.
That's true. In fact, when Raymond approached me about this show and was
Our
talking
producer
about
for the show.
writers' community, I thought, wasn't that an oxymoron in some ways? You are just operating in a very solitary way for the majority of the time. And then when you come out of your hole, you do want to have people there to pat you on the back, or, be a shoulder to cry on.
You need to go back into that hole for
You do.
real creative work, because it's all this networking and stuff. It's fun.
It's exhausting.
But that's not how the work gets done.
No, you got to
I've
show up.
discovered.
You got to show up at the page and.
I think there were people at Iowa who spent the entire 2 years, I think, drinking whiskey in the Foxhead Bar, and that was their 2 years there, because it's so easy talking shop. It's so
Right.
easy to talk about writing
And not
do it.
And so, and we talked about Koree Heights again. We talked about the workshop. I don't know that everybody necessarily gets the concept. Is it a little bit of both? Is it also the camaraderie, but also, I mean, we talked about you're doing line edits, you're looking
It's-
over
it's
manuscripts, and
work.
it's mainly work.
Right. It
It's
is work.
serious.
It's like an academic class. It's a more academic approach. I know there are some workshops where you'll show up and they'll give you prompts and you sort of do free writing. But the Quarry Heights model is sort of the university model. It's that you're coming, you're presenting pages. Everyone's going to read them carefully and thoughtfully, respond to them in a letter, and in class we discuss it. We talk about what's going right, and then we talk about what needs some improvement. And it's really getting down to the art form and how things are working on a sentence level and a craft level, which I think is, it's important even for professional writers to kind of return to that state of studenthood.
I mean, writing is a craft, like everything else, and one hopes that, you start not knowing very much, and the more you do, the better you get. And anybody who ever thinks that they know all that there is to know is probably not going to be that great a writer. You always need to be striving to improve. So that sort of model is clearly one that's going to
You're
work.
going to be told when you've done something well, but you're not going to get empty compliments at Koree Heights workshop.
I better take a moment to remind our listeners that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famulner, and today we're talking about 3 local authors about what it's like to write in Columbia. We're joined by Alex George, an author and lawyer who lives in Columbia, whose most recent novel, A Good American, was published last year. Marlene Lee is from Columbia and is the author of The Absent Woman, which was published earlier this year. And Keija Parssinen is the author of The Ruins of Us, which is the Daniel Boone Regional Library's one-read book this year. For you and our audience, what would you like to know about what it's like to try to become a published author? Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. We've talked a lot about the good things about being a writer in Missouri, but what are some of the challenges, especially on that hurdle of getting published? I mean, you mentioned that you have an agent, Alex, and that probably helps a lot. But do publishers just look at you sideways when you say I'm from Missouri, or how do you get over that hump? How is that successful? I guess.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, and because I began my career in London, which I guess was a slightly more usual place to be writing books from than here. Certainly, when I moved to Columbia, people were sort of going, "I'm sorry, where?" But I don't think that people who sit in their glass towers in Manhattan really care where a writer writes. I think that what they care about are the words on the page and the stories that are told, and if they work, and if they resonate, and if they ring true, that's all they really care about.
Yeah. 2 of the greatest writers that I'm really enjoying right now, Daniel Woodrell, and then lives in Missouri. He lives in the Ozarks, which is where he's the author of Winter's Bone, and he's absolutely fantastic. And I think Alex is right. People don't really care where you come from. And in fact, agents are so eager to find and open to finding writers anywhere that they do read their slush piles. And in fact, there was a wonderful success story for one of the Quarry Heights writers, Laura McHugh, whose book recently sold to Spiegel and Grau. It's an imprint of Random House in an auction, and it was really exciting. And she just started out by sending query letters to agents, to dozens of agents, and saying, "This is what my book is about." And those letters were read, and her pages were read, and she was found by a wonderful agent who then was able to sell the book very successfully. So it can happen, and that's sort of the enticing thing, I think, for any writer out there, is that dream does feel sort of just within reach. And I would say, it's something that you just have to sort of pursue diligently, first and foremost with just writing a really great book, and then sort of getting around to the business side of it and searching out agents.
And that's exactly right. And what I would say, I mean, if you look at the numbers and the statistics of the number of people who say they're writing a book, or who are writing a book, or who maybe even have finished a book, the number of those people who will ever find an agent or get published is terrifyingly small, and nobody in their right mind would begin this process just with that in mind. I mean, you have to really want to write for the sake of writing. Yes. And if you get published, that's wonderful, but it's very much a bonus. It's otherwise there would be, because the chance, I mean, we're sitting here and we're all, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I feel extraordinarily lucky to be here.
I can speak to that point. I wrote for 30 years. I wrote 12 novels. And my first novel that was published is actually the 5th one that I wrote. And the one coming out in November is the 6th one that I wrote. And what kept me going 30 years wasn't that I just flagellated myself and said, you've got to keep, no, I just couldn't not write. And I decided that was my life. I would be a writer.
Right.
And, better to fail in a romantic way, like I did my best, than to just finally say, oh, I throw in the towel. No, I wanted to write, and I did write.
Yours is a great story, Marlene. And her book, The Absent Woman, is wonderful. I just finished it about 2 weeks ago and
Thanks.
really enjoyed it.
Well, there's a few questions from the chat room I want to try to get in. We just have a few minutes left in the show. One of them is from a listener named Scott, asked, what books are on your must-read lists right now?
Well, the best book I've read this year is All That Is by James Salter. And he hasn't written a book for 30 years, I don't think, and this one was probably worth the wait. It is the most extraordinary novel I've read in years. It's just got everything in it. It's just brilliant. So if you read one book this year, read that one.
He is wonderful and really underrated,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think, too. He's kind of a writer's writer. I think.
He is very much a writer's
Definitely.
writer.
Very
That's
lyrical.
true.
I would say one of the best books I've read this year is called Cartwheel, and it's actually out in a couple of weeks. It's written by Jennifer Dubois. It takes on the sort of themes of the Amanda Knox story. So this innocent abroad who gets caught up in this this murder and this investigation gone horribly awry. And it asks really fascinating existential questions, and it's just hugely entertaining. It's very funny, it's fast-paced, it's a good page-turner. It's sort of everything a suspenseful literary book should be. So.
Do you have any recommendations?
I tend to read some of the older classics over again.
Nothing wrong
And
with
I do
that.
have James Salter on my bedside table, and you've nudged me toward picking that up tonight. But I love Willa Cather. She's Midwestern. And she isn't talked about too much, but she's a fabulous writer. She inspires me.
Okay. I have another question, this one specifically for Keija, talking about your book, The Ruins of Us. As a writer, how would you feel if this book was made into a movie? Would it upset you to see a screenwriter possibly misinterpret the characters, or would the religious theme be too controversial? That was from McCole Wash in the chat room earlier.
Interesting. I would be thrilled if it were ever made into a movie at the outset of things, but I think once you go and see the movie, I remember Scott Spencer, who was one of my teachers at Iowa, his wonderful book Endless Love, which is a classic, was made into probably one of the worst movies of all time, and he said he showed up for the debut and the director just said, kind of look away, like don't just pretend it's not happening. So it can go horribly wrong, I think. I would worry that these characters would become sort of stock characters in the way that Hollywood has a tendency to do. I think it would need to be handled by a director who could sort of handle more subtle themes and depictions of characters. That would be really important to me, because I certainly wouldn't want this book to be used as propaganda, anti-Islamic propaganda in any way, shape, or form.
We just have about 40 seconds before the end of the show. I'll ask this nice stereotypical ending question. What are you all working on now? What's next?
The new novel is called A History of Flight, I think, and it's set in Maine in the 1970s, and it's about friendships and punk rock.
Oh, that sounds good.
I want to read that book.
I'm working on a novel that I was working on in Quarry Heights, Edgefield, set in Salina, Kansas.
And
Okay.
I am working on The Girls of Port Sabine, which will come out from Harper Books in 2015. And it follows a group of high school girls and an outbreak of mass hysteria in their high school.
Okay. Well, that's it for today's Intersection. Thanks so much to our guests, local authors Keija Parssinen, Alex George, and Marlene Lee. We'd like to remind those of you enjoying this as a rebroadcast that Intersection takes place live for a full hour from 2 to 3 every Monday afternoon. You can watch live streaming video of our program each Monday afternoon online at kbia.org. Alongside that video, you can submit your questions and comments and take part in an online discussion with others in the audience. You'll also find an archive of all of our past programs, including the full hour of today's conversation. Intersection is a broadcast from the Reynolds Journalism Institute and is a project of RJI and KBIA. Intersection is produced by Raymond Tungakar, Janet Saidi, and Ruben Stern. Travis McMillan is our technical director with production assistance from Sarah Harkins and Casey Morrell. Pat Akers is our audio producer. Executive directors are Mike Dunn and Mike McKean. I'm Ryan Famuliner. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great week.